Hi there, it's Ian here, and you're watching Grumpy Opinions, the show where I'm going to tell you all about what I think of films, TV shows, games, and life in general. Let's get on with the show. The Handmaid's Tale is a Hulu show about Peggy from Mad Men being a captive religious baby factory for a rich family in a future America run by a religious cult. Episode 5, Faithful, finds us back with Offred and actual Fred still playing Scrabble, but this has clearly become a normal routine for them, because she's comfortable enough to joke and drink whiskey and flirt with him, and he's chuffed enough to pull out a copy of Cosmo for her to read. Oh, nice. We seem to be in an unspecified amount of time after the last week, but life is generally going on. Rita and Nick are doing their jobs, Fredo's eating cereal, and Mrs. Commander asks her to help outside. Offred's a bit concerned and does some fantasizing about doing a stab on her in the neck with some secateurs, but it turns out that Mrs. C also has suspicions that Commander Shakespeare might be sterile, so she wants Freddie to have a quick push with Nick and make sure she gets a bit pregnant. Oh, right. Down the shops a bit later on, June bumps into Pirate Jenny and her pal, and lo and behold, it's Emily, of course, off Stephen as she's now called, and apparently she didn't have her tongue cut off because she's chatting okay. But she's a bit nervy and tells June that she can't help her with the resistance because she's out. So too much of a security risk because everyone knows she's a lesbian and she's probably being watched 24/7. Anyway, off Glenair gets in her face on the way home, and it turns out that she used to be a drug addict living on the streets, and as far as she's concerned, being a handmaid is a much better life, and she doesn't want anything messing that up for her. Okay. Back home, and it's time for a wee bit of Nick action. And June goes down this wee house. She feels weird, thinking that this somehow feels like she's cheating on her old husband. And it turns out that, her husband was actually a random guy that she met out one day when she was out with Moira, but they ended up staying in touch and having lunch in secret, because it turns out that, dun dun dun, he was married. But that didn't stop them having an illicit affair, getting a posh hotel room together and having a bit of a roll in the hay. After which he says, "Oh, I'm going to leave my wife because I love you." Oh. Back in the bad now, Nick seems nervous as all hell, and he's bumping away with Mrs. C trying not to watch, and June can't help herself from grabbing his arm because, it's actually nice. And afterwards she snaps at Mrs. C, but Mrs. C isn't angry. Instead she just does a bit of a pray over her tummy, to make the baby all good and everything. Interesting. But later on at the real ceremony, Commander Fred starts getting a bit handsy, and instead of time warping her like he normally does or looking away or at Mrs. C, he's staring Offred right in the eyes, and then he starts groping her leg, and that starts really scaring her. And sure enough, afterwards she storms down to his office and tells him off, pointing out that she could get sent to the colonies for this, which takes him aback a wee bit, and he calms down. But then slowly as they talk, it becomes clear that despite being happy to bend the rules for him, he's kind of a true believer, and that creeps June out a bit. And after she leaves, she ends up puking in the sink just before Nick comes by, and in her angry state she demands to know if he's actually an eye, and he says, "Yeah." Okay then. Meanwhile, we also get to see that Emily's having a better time in her new place because her mistress will slyly offer to be ill that night so they can't have the ceremony. But as Emily observes, she can't always be ill on ceremony night. So then later, her and Offred run into each other at the market, so Offred gets a pal to run interference with Offglin too, and they can chat a bit more about the resistance. Turns out it's called Mayday, and they're in the middle of exchanging real names when Offglin 2 drags June away, and then Emily spots that the same extra just got out of the car twice, and then she just gives her an idea, so she jumps in the car and starts tearing around the square, which makes all the handmaids laugh and cheer. And then she knocks an eye with the car, and then she splats him totally. Yikes. So she's getting arrested, and everyone else makes a sharp exit, with Offglin 2 telling June not to worry because, they're going to look out for each other. And inside the house, June has a wee word with Mrs. C, who heard about the market incident, but June isn't scared of her anymore. And after that night, when it's lights out, it's time for her to get something that she actually really wants. And that something happens to be some honest, old-fashioned, normal sex with Nick. Go on yourself, June. You have some fun. So how did I feel about this week? Well, I think it's absolutely great that we got to start to see the people kind of behind the masks on this show. This episode's called Faithful, and that makes sense, because every single character in this is breaking faith with someone or something. Everyone in this episode is showing defiance towards someone else, or towards an idea, or society, or in some way or another. And I really love that that's what they did in the show, and they put that kind of level into thought into the theme for every single character in this week's episode. We've got Offglin, and she's happy to break the rules, we know that, because she's playing Scrabble with the commander, but he's happy to go along with that, and then he's happy to give her women's magazines to read, even though reading is forbidden. But then he's also happy to get a bit gropey in the bedroom and enjoy the sex a bit too much. And like his wife Serena, she's okay with breaking rules clearly because she's happy enough to get Nick involved. And Nick, I mean, he's saying that he's an eye, but is he or is he not? I mean, that was such a weird scene. Maybe he's lying, but I mean, if he's not lying, what's he doing? Boffing June because I mean, he's supposed to be stopping that kind of thing. So what's going on? And then Emily, I mean, she straight up stole a car and like ran over a guy, and like her mistress was willing to break the rules as well to save Emily from having to have sex with her commander. But it's not just Gilead. Like we finally found out about the whole Luke and June situation, and it turns out that they were having an affair. I mean, at least at first, before obviously she had a kid and everything, but when everything had changed. But it finally makes sense because, like, a few weeks ago, Aunt Lydia called her an adulterer, and I was like, "What's that all about?" And I assumed it was just, another insult being thrown at them. But it turns out that yeah, Luke and June were defying social convention, and she was like keeping secrets from Moira, and like Luke was keeping secrets from his wife. And did you notice in that scene, like in the background, there was kids in like red handmail style coats outside the windows, and like the building was really kind of ominously grey and square and militaristic almost. I mean, that's not an accident. I think that was like foreshadowing. This is the future that's about to come, and they've maybe just not noticed it. I mean, I think this was great for that kind of character nods, and it helps the show work. I mean, we know these characters a little bit better now. We know that they're good people, at least, that there are some nice and reasonable people in this universe, like Emily's mistress. And we know that like the story is going somewhere now, and there's going to be more intrigue and suspense. But not everything was perfect, obviously. Is everyone just kind of a wee bit stupid on this show? It's that whole idiocracy kind of thing. The whole point this week was to show people defying expectations or subverting something or trying to work against something. But again, this is only a few years from like modern day. And suddenly everyone's IQ seems to have dropped to like 50 or something. I mean, the commander, Mrs. Commander, she's just ignoring when he's like plainly like really getting into the sex now. But I mean, I suppose you could argue that she's so caught up in the guilt and stuff that she's got that whole organizing the wee liaison with Nick and everything on her mind. So maybe she's distracted. But it kind of came across like she's just not really paying attention. And like Fred, he seems so weirdly self-satisfied and unrealistic about life in general. I mean, it makes you wonder, who was he before all this started? But did he grow up in a cult or something? Because he's so deeply entrenched in like the Gilead mindset, and it's only been a few years. But he seems to be totally like as if he's lived that his whole life and he's never known anything else, which is kind of bizarre. I mean, and also Emily. I mean, she had that car, and instead of driving away, she just drove around in a circle. I mean, come on, she could have done something. She could have done something else. She could have escaped. I mean, she probably would have gotten killed. But I was like, "What are you doing?" As soon as she came back around the block, I was like, "What's going on?" And then she just circles, and then she runs over like one guy twice, the same guy. I mean, I don't get it. I mean, I suppose you could say, look, she's openly rebelling, and this is like means something because people are seeing her do it. But she didn't really do much other than kill like one random guy who was basically just an eye, just like a grunt. And then you know, after that, that's her, back in Clapton Irons and presumably off to the colonies now, or going to get dead, like hung, like the other girl was the other week. But the show continues, and I'm really interested to see where it goes from here. So till next time, I've been Ian, and these have been my grumpy opinions.